Hey everyone, Reid into Valor. We're going to talk about in this video today is we're going to talk about Patriots Day. And what do you think of Patriots Day? What does it mean to you? Let's go ahead and get started. I just got done doing my 107 drill. I do it maybe not every Friday, but maybe at least once a month I try to get out there and do it. So it's a drill that, is probably pretty solid use of 50 rounds, and it's good cardio and all that stuff. But I've done a video about it before. But the purpose of this video is to talk about Patriots Day. It's April 19th, right? April 19th. That should be a day that everybody in the United States of America knows exactly what happened then in 1775. That was a day where, American militia, American Minutemen, these were individuals that were highly skilled at arms. These were people that believed in natural rights. These were people that believed in being able to defend your natural rights against tyranny. That's what, on that day, that's exactly the day that we became a nation for all intents and purposes. I understand the Declaration of Independence wasn't until the next year, but what happened on that day was that was a day that the United States, people in the United States fought back against Britain. So let's do a little background here. What was happening on that day was that the British Army, the Redcoats, the British regulars, under command of General Gage, left from Boston to go out into the Massachusetts countryside at Lexington and Concord. Concord is what they're targeting specifically. They had a couple of goals there. The first reason that they were marching out there in force with firearms, that's the British, was that they were going to disarm the colonial militia that had been drilling, training, and procuring weapons and ammunition and food supplies. They were there to disarm them, as well as try to locate Samuel Adams and John Hancock was their secondary objective. But what they were trying to do was they were trying to forcibly disarm the colonial militia. And why would they want to do that? Well, after the Boston Tea Party, the British put in a set of draconian measures. They were called the Intolerable Acts, where you had British soldiers. It was basically martial law. People in Britain couldn't buy or sell without government permission. There's a lot of other ones in there. But the big point was that the people of Massachusetts understood at that point that the writing was on the wall, that there was no going to be a nonviolent conflict with the British regulars, the British government. The situation there had deteriorated to such there wasn't going to be a possibility of reconciliation. There wasn't going to be a possibility of, they're going to be reasonable and they'll see through this. So the militia, what they started doing was they started going out and drilling. They started getting together with like-minded people and they started practicing and training and drilling. So they had their own firearms to do that. In fact, back then, the most technologically advanced firearm on the planet was the single-shot firelock or flintlock. Much like today, the AR-15 or M16 M4 is in that same category for people being in use today. Well, the British didn't think that they needed them, and they didn't think that that regular people should have that stuff. So they went out into the countryside, and that's when the Minutemen happened. It's a famous Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem came in, and probably if you're over the age of 40, probably read that in school. If you're under the age of 40, you're probably told how evil and racist that those people were. But back then, we looked at them as heroes, and when we look at how important that it is to learn that story, it's absolutely important. And now let's get into the nitty-gritty. British were assembled. The colonists had a series of networks along that path. And what happened was that they had a series of writers. Paul Revere wasn't the only guy that went out there and rode. You also had Samuel Prescott, William Dawes. Both of them went out there and spread the alarm. A couple of them got captured. Revere got captured as well as William Dawes. In fact, the only guy that completed the entire ride was Samuel Prescott. So he warned all the militia what was happening. And he'd say the regulars are coming, or the redcoats were coming, to signify that they were on the way to do that. Now, the colonists, the Minutemen, the militia knew this day would happen. They knew that the British at some point in time would put the militia to the test. They knew that. And hence the drilling, hence the training, hence the proficiency. And so when they got there at Lexington, of course, the militia assembled at Lexington Green and stood there in formation. No one really knows who fired the first shot. Some people say it was the colonists. Some people say it was the British. Really doesn't matter. That's where the shot heard around the world happened, and the game was on. So, of course, the militia did, of course, withdraw. We retreated and fled. The British continued on to Lexington, where they were met by a much more powerful force at Concord. That's where you had a serious battle, big-time skirmishes happening, and that's when the British knew they were in trouble once other militia and other colonists started pouring in. And for all intents and purposes, chased them out of the area. So they did a hasty retreat, if you will, back to Boston, at which point everybody was in the game. They were getting shot at from the woods. They were getting sniped. They were getting pieced up. They sustained many, many, many casualties on the way from Concord all the way back to Boston. Boston was a little fortress city where they had, walls up, and you can't go in here if you don't have a certain pass kind of stuff. Kind of resembles modern-day Washington, D.C., if you will. The reason why I do these videos, and the reason why I want to give a historical context to all this stuff, is I see that although the firearms may have changed, we went from single-shot muzzle-loading firelocks to these. Although the weapons may change, the only variable and the only difference behind that equation is the individual behind the weapon. See, our founders didn't really take kindly to tyrants trying to tell them how to live their life, or what they could have, or what they could do, or what natural rights they retained. See, our founders valued freedom highly. And although they had technologically inferior weapons, they did have a will to fight back. One question I get all the time, people ask me all the time, Reid, when are we going to know it's time? When are we going to know it's time? Are you advocating overthrow the government? No, I'm not in any capacity. What we really need is a restoration. We need a restoration of our government. We need a restoration back to its limited powers. The federal government should have limited and defined powers instead of infinite and undefined like they try to do today. And people ask, well, when is it time? Well, let's look back at history and figure that one out. When did our ancestors fight back? When were they willing to fire against their own government? Well, in this case, on Patriots Day, they were willing to shoot once they came for their firearms, and once they came for their gunpowder supplies, that would be ammunition, and once they came for taking away all their meals and all their other stuff. And I want you to understand, guys, that this is a pretty crazy thing. People draw parallels to this all the time. I don't know, when they come to your door and they try to take your guns and try to ask stupid questions without a warrant and try to, do things by force, that's an individual decision. I know what my individual decision is. I know that I've made that decision a long time ago. And I know that many of you out there are thinking, man, I got a family, I've got this and that. Well, this is what safeguards your family. You and this are what safeguards your family, no one else. Government doesn't do it. The police don't do it. All these other surveillance mechanisms, they don't do it. So you are the safeguard for that. And at the end of the day, our founders all had families too. Our founders all had wives and children. Our founders all had a desire and wealth and things to lose if things went sideways in a hurry, which it did for a lot of them. But I want you to notice this. Back then, when they fired on the British, they were called traitors. They were called seditionists. They were called subversives. They were called every nasty, rank name that you could ever put up against somebody. That's what the British called them. That's what their names were in all the British newspapers. But eventually, as the war went on, and the chances of American victory were greater and greater and greater, and then eventually we did win, and then eventually all throughout history, those people weren't called traitors. Those people were called patriots. And that's what we're proudly remembering and honoring today on Patriots Day, is human beings with courage, proficiency, and willpower and faith to see that through. This is Reid Henrichs of Valor, reminding you, the lessons that we learn are written on the tombstones of others. We'll see you on the ridge.